Now let's come towards the session itself. Um, so dark deployments, and that's the name of the session. We're going to talk about dark deployments. My name is Zen Babar, and well, that is me. And people have been telling me that my headshot does not really look like me, or rather, I don't look like my headshot at all. So, if that doesn't, match this, do let me know in the comments. So then I'll know finally to get a new headshot, because to be honest, this is quite maybe 2, 3, or 4 years old picture. So do let me know. We'll begin by thanking our sponsors. Of course, we have All2. They have quite a few uh, managed packages for Salesforce, and then we have PDF Butler. They have document generation and signage solutions. Media Monks, which is a digital media and marketing company, and then we have Gridmate. They have an awesome data management solution, and of course, special thanks to the Trailblazer community. Now, about me. So, I like to call myself a software engineer, and when I say I like to call myself, that is because I actually I'm mostly self-taught. I actually do have a bachelor's in aerospace engineering, but the software thing is, all most of it is self-taught. And I'm working currently working at S&P Global as a Salesforce developer and a release engineer, and these are two separate roles. So I'm currently mapped 50-50 in both roles. Um, and before we go any further, I would like to mention the scale of the work that we're doing and how it relates to why I'm here today. So, we have the our Salesforce usage is huge, and we have like in fact, 11 production instances, and around 25 Scrum teams, which are working across a multitude of release trains and in pipelines. So we really do have to follow the absolute best practices in DevOps and releasing things like the dark deployments, because if we don't, things could get messy pretty fast. So that is why I'm here today, and that's how we stumbled upon the dark deployments, and that led to this session. Previously, I've worked in Ericsson and Huawei, and I have worked in digital transformation and digital financial services domains there, and I've had a variety of roles over the years. I've been a developer, I've been a DevOps engineer, I've been a system administrator for infrastructure, and so I have built a base of a lot of things. So you can say I'm a jack of all, but definitely a king to none. So that's kind of the situation that I have. And talking about the agenda, so first of all, I will let you know what dark deployments are. I assume many of you are maybe beginners and don't know what dark deployments are, so we'll start from there. What exactly it is, because when I first heard of dark deployments, I thought it was some sort of malicious deployment, something related to the dark web or something, but it's not really. It's a very good thing. And once you know what dark deployment is, then I will begin to explain how to dark deploy, and especially in a Salesforce context, because Salesforce has its own ecosystem and everything. So specific to Salesforce, how we can dark deploy, and then we'll touch on the importance of dark deployment. And I think that once we go through the introduction, the ways of dark deploying, most of you will have a pretty good idea of the importance and the benefits of it. But we'll still go through it in the end, to really drive the point home. So before I really talk about dark deployments, I would like to mention or talk about the differences in a release and a deployment. And I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but just for anyone who doesn't know, the difference between deployment and release, because I mean, most of the time it's spoken of interchangeably. A deployment is called a release can be called a deployment. Even I use the terms interchangeably. Uh, so what exactly is the difference between a deployment and a release? And so there's this great book about Salesforce DevOps by um, Andrew. Actually, I don't remember the name. Let me check real quick. Andrew Davis. Yeah. So it's called Mastering Salesforce DevOps by Andrew Davis, and he talks about this in detail, and he has a very apt example of to explain the difference between a release and a deployment. So he talks about uh, that for example, on a Christmas Eve, the parents, they wrap up the presents and then they put it under the Christmas tree, and then in the morning the children, they wake up and they come to the tree, and then they can actually open the presents and play with them, or whatever. And I'm paraphrasing here, of course. These are not exact words, but this is what he says, the example that he gives. So he says that, so the when the parents, they wrap the presents and put it under the tree, that's a deployment. And then when the children, they come and then they open the presents in the morning, that's a release, and that's exactly what it is. So let's say a production deployment. When you talk about a production deployment, that means that we deploy or we move or copy all the metadata that's needed for the feature into production. And a release is basically when the end user actually gets to experience that feature or use that feature. And of course, they're used interchangeably most of the time, because most of the time they're the same. They're the same. They occur at the same time. When you have a production deployment, it automatically means production release, because the users will get to experience the new feature. And that's where dark deployment comes in. So a dark deployment would separate the two. It would separate the release with the deployment, and we'll talk about how to do that, and what that means in a while. So essentially what it means is that features can be turned on and off. So if I can give you uh, a broader view of it without going into technical details, which will go in a while. But let's say that the features are deployed to production, but in a sort of inactive form. And then when there's time for release, we activate them. you know and if we can activate them because of the design, because we designed them the features in such a way, and we'll talk about the design later, but we'll design them in such a way that they can be turned on, so then they can also be turned off. And we'll talk about the significance of that in the coming slides. And depending on what way we follow for dark deployments, uh, we can turn it on and off completely for the whole org, depending on the design, of course. Some ways support that, some ways don't. But we can turn that on and off for the whole organization, or we can turn on them on and off for certain groups of people. And we'll talk about that also a little later, and also the importance of that. So first way, it's pretty simple. I'm sure all of most of you would know about FLS. It's field level security. So in case there's some beginners here, let's say that you made a new field in Salesforce, it does not automatically grant access to everyone. So you have to define which profiles get access to it, and what kind of access. Is it a read-only access, or is it they can change it, and so you get to define that. And speaking of deployment, fields are separate and profiles are separate. So FLS is deployed, can be deployed separately, and fields can be deployed separately. And the best thing about it is that you can also deploy the layout and pages with it separately than the FLS. And I actually learned that the hard way, because when I started Salesforce development, I had a user story. It had lots of moving parts, some fields and layouts as well. And then I research how to do that. I made the fields, I made the layouts, and then once it was done, it took me a long time because I was completely new at the time. So once it was done, I was like, phew. I just promoted it QA, marked it ready for QA, and then just went home, and then called it a day early, in fact, because I was so happy with what I did. And I got a call, and when I came in the next day, it turned out that QA head was screaming that there was nothing there. The layouts, the QA guy did not see the fields in the layouts. And I was really surprised. And I mean, I checked the deployments and everything. It was there, everything was perfect. And then after a while I realized I didn't deploy the field level security with it, and that's why the profile of the QA guy did not have access to those fields. It was just as simple as that. And that gives us a very good advantage for dark deploying, because the layouts can be deployed to production, and the users do not have access to the fields. So that means they do not see the field, right? So it is a very good way of deploying the fields and layouts, of course. And uh, uh, for if it's a lightning page, then you can also assign different lightning pages to different profiles. So you can promote deploy the pages but not assign it to the profiles, or maybe assign it just to the system admin profile. Or you can also use custom permissions with permission sets, right, to hide it from public view in production. And then what happens when it's time for release? It's just a simple matter of deploying the FLS or assigning the permission sets to the users, and that's it. It's a simple deployment, and then it's a release. And the benefits that you get, for example, let's say that there's a huge feature and it has, let's say, 10 custom fields, and the custom fields are divided into, let's say, 5 user stories, and maybe, I don't know, let's say 2 sprints, right? That makes sense. So in an ordinary release, if the release and deployment were at the same time, you would let the story sit in maybe the UAT environment or whatever is the environment before your production environment for a while, until both the sprints are complete, everything is ready, and then you deploy it once, in a big chunk of user stories. uh, and that can lead to, of course, I mean, it will lead to issues and merge conflicts. Of course, I mean, deployment issues, we can solve them. Nothing to be afraid of. But still, it can be simplified if you just, as soon as one story was ready, you promote it to production in a dark deployment way. So it's the metadata is there, it's not released yet. And so the deployment process becomes much simpler. And then at the end of the 2 sprints, when it's time for release, you just do the simple FLS deployment, or you do the permission set assignment, and that can be something that can be done by the production support team as well. So in that simple way, you can just release it. Of course, that only works for like uh, pages and layouts and fields. What if you have some code or flows, that kind of functionality that you want to hide behind something? That's where type comes in, and it's a very good way of dark deploying, especially if it's code or flows. And it's a natural sort of barrier. I mean, you don't have to make anything new. You can just hide behind it a new record type. So any record with a new record type would get processed by the new feature, the new code. And anything that has old record types will be processed using the old code. And I want to give you an example because we use that recently in a great way. So I cannot, of course, give you the specifics of it, but let's just say on a broader view, we had a managed package that we were using for something, and we decided to go to a different managed package for using that, for going through the same process. It had, of course, different functionality, but the end result was the same. And for whatever reasons, we liked the second managed package better than the first one. So we had to like migrate to that managed package. It required a lot of functionality change, code changes, new flows, and of course the new managed package installation as well, and everything. And then the mapping and configuration, lots of things. It was a big project. So, but we could not uh, yeah, pause the business while we deployed it. you know so we what we did was we made a new record type of the custom object that was in the center of it. And every kind of functionality, I mean, we used different ways of dark deploying, but the one that I'm talking about with the record type, so what we did was we hid the functionality behind the record type, right? So and then we dark deployed it, so slowly in incremental way. So when some features were ready, we dark deployed it. And because no records were had that record type at that point, it was a dark deployment, the features were not used. And then what happened in actual release date, we so the new records that were made after that date had the new record type. And so they went to the new functionality, and anything that was already in progress before that release date, they continued with the old functionality. And then slowly, as the old record types were, the processes were completed, and Their records were finished. There came a time when all the records had the new record type, and all the new functionality was being followed everywhere. So that way we achieved a migration without any with business continuity. There was no um, problem with the business continuity there, and we were able to dark deploy it beforehand. We did not have to make a huge deployment at just the release date. We were able to deploy it in an incremental fashion, and it was a very smooth process. Of course, then afterwards we had to do a cleanup project that removed the old functionality altogether once that was not needed anymore. But that made the whole process very simple, and it can be used in code, and even in LWCs, either in the HTML pages, you can do that, and it can be used in flows as well. So it's a very good way of dark deploying. Then comes label. So, and this concept is very common in almost all software. You can use something they call a feature flag or a feature toggle, sort of like a switch that you can turn on and off. And if it's on, you do some functionality, and if it's off, you do something else. The code does something else. And it can be hidden in a configuration file, or and maybe it can be managed through administration portal or anything. And with Salesforce, we can make this work by custom labels. As you know, it can have strings, right? So let's say that I make a label. In this case, it's winter 22, which may be the name of my new feature. So let's say that I make it true, right? I give it the value of if I give it the value of true, there'll be some code will execute. And if it's not true, then some other code with maybe the old code will be used. So I give it the value of false, and then dark deploy the feature. And once it's the release time, I can anyone from CRM support, or Salesforce support, whatever, your production support, however your organization follows that, they can just make changes on production, just change the value of the label, and it's turned on. Simple as that. uh, of course, there is some issues with this approach, which we'll discuss a little later. But it's a good approach, especially if the features are large and they need to be turned on for the whole org. Because if you're just using this label thing, then of course there's no functionality to be able to turn it on in a progressive way for some users at first. No, it will be turned on for the whole org, obviously. So so you have to keep that in mind. So it's good for huge projects that just need to be turned on like that, um, with some um, you know problems as well, issues as well, which we'll discuss a little later. And then there's of course custom metadata, and the idea behind it is the same as the custom labels, except we have one little advantage here. So you can make a custom metadata and then make a custom checkbox field in it with this. So example, winter 22 custom a checkbox field, and in the code you don't have to compare the string value. You can just see if it's on or not. If it's on, it's a new functionality. If it's off, the old functionality goes. Uh, and the it's the same thing as that, except we have some advantages, small advantages. So because the labels are inherently, they are a string value, so they can have anything. And so whoever turns them on, they can have a bit of confusion about it. For example, uh, if it's the value is supposed to be true to turn a feature on, is it like true all caps? Is it true with the capital true with a small t? How does it work? Maybe they add a small space accidentally. So, and of course, if they're careful, it's not an issue. But still, it's so to make something to improve that, to circumvent the problem, you can use a custom metadata. It's better because you don't have to write anything in it. Whoever wants to turn it on, it's just a check field. You can use, and the same thing, you can use it in code, you can use it in flows and everything. So it really works. And uh, mm, I'm pretty sure that all of you now have a great idea of why dark deployments are important. If if this was a good session for you, if I was clear enough, I'm not sure if I was, but if I was, I'm sure you have a pretty good idea of the importance of dark deployments now. But I would still like to discuss it, one by one, so it can really drive the point home. So first is the ability to turn the features on and off, and we just discussed with dark deployments you can actually you have sort of an inactive feature that you can turn on, and by extension of that definition you can turn it off as well, right? Makes sense. For example, if it's a label, you check you make it true if the functionality comes on, and then if you wanted to turn it off, you just make the label false again, or you uncheck that box in custom metadata, or you change the record types of the new records, or you take the FLS away again, take the field permissions away from those profiles again, something like that. So you can turn it off. And why is that important? Is because let's say you have a huge feature in production now, and it was QA tested, it was UAT'd, so it's good, but still there was maybe a bug in it. Maybe the business is not happy with it. Maybe users do not find it user friendly. They hate it, and they're not able to use it properly for for whatever reasons. It's causing issues now, and they just want to the old functionality back. Of course, you have to fix it, but before you can go ahead and fix it, all you have to do is turn it off. Again, you just turn it off, the whole functionality is back, and the users are happy, and then you bought yourself some time, some breathing room to go in and fix the issues or change it or whatever. It's a very good way of sort of rolling back. The second is easy way to manage alpha and beta releases and gradual rollouts, and you cannot do it with all the ways that we discussed, but with some of the ways you can do it. So you can give the field accesses to maybe some profiles for the alpha releases, and then other profiles for beta releases, and for the actual release you can give it to all profiles, something like that. Or you can use um, the record type approach that I mentioned for the same thing. So it makes it really easier to make your features accessible for some people and not for others, and that is a good way of a good application for alpha and beta releases. And of course gradual rollouts, like I mentioned that in our project. So we use the record type approach, and we were using only the new uh, records were using the new functionality, so it was sort of a gradual rollout. So not every record started following the same process, but incrementally more and more records were following the same process. And what that gives us is a good way to catch any bugs and do production testing. So for example, if there is an issue, uh, let's say only 1% or 10% of your users are facing it, because the rest are still on the old functionality. And then uh, it's easier to fix, and it's less of an outage if or less of a priority if only some of the users are facing it, not the others, right? And then uh, the third is of course simplify production releases, and this is, I mean, one of the best things. Speaking as a release engineer, it's one of the best benefits of a dark deployment. Because let's say you have a huge project with lots of metadata, classes, and there's like flows and everything, layouts, and they have been all sitting in the UAT environment, or some other environment, and then on the release date they have to go to production. It's a high pressure situation, because you have to release it, and then you have to deal with the merge conflicts and the deployment errors that come with it. And although, I mean, like I said, deployment errors we can solve them, but still it's a very high pressure situation. And because all of that is going together, it's sort of I would say magnify the issues, especially the merge conflicts. But if you had dark deployed it as soon as things were ready, you dark deployed it, and over the course of the whole project, the release would be a breeze. You just have to turn it on. And if even if during the dark deployments, if there were any deployment errors, you still have breathing room, because it's not a release, it's deployment, it's dark deployment. You have room to fix it. It's not that high pressure situation. So simplify production release. I love that, being a release engineer. So that is one of the best benefits of dark deployments. uh, Now, just I was like talking about some issues with the label, the flag approach, the toggles of the flag approach. There's some issues, can be some issues with that. So first of all, it's definitely tech debt. The flags, they're in your code, they're in the org, the labels and the custom data is in your org. It's technical debt. They should be cleaned up. later. And so let's say that you released a feature, dark deployed a feature, it was released, you turned on the label and it's released, and now you have another feature, you did the same thing. Now your class has two flags, right? Two labels, and two feature flags, utilizing the labels. So now testing becomes kind of complicated, because now if it's supposed to be thoroughly tested, then you need to test it with the first flag off, second on, and vice versa, and then both flags on, both flags off. So testing becomes complicated if you have flags and more than one flags in your code. And that is why they definitely need to follow a life cycle. So once, let's say, you had a label that was using as a feature flag, you released it, and now you need to wait for some time to get the feedback, in case you want to turn it off, like I said, for rollback if there's any issues. But give it some time, let's say maybe 10 days, maybe a month, maybe 3 months. And after 3 months, you've realized now that new functionality is working perfectly, and you don't need you wouldn't have to turn it back anyway. So then the code needs to be cleaned from the flag needs to be cleared from the code and the org as well, because it's technical debt. And then the code that was hidden behind the flag needs to be the default code, default functionality. So that is one thing. And let me see if we have some time. So I just have, we're in a time crunch. I would just like to, there's a story about it. So you should never use an old flag to for repurpose an old flag for new functionality. And there's a tale of woe that goes with it. I will get through it very quickly because we don't have much time. But there was an investment firm that was using a flag, and so they had a flag behind which there was an old functionality that was not being used now. It's defunct functionality, and they needed some new functionality now. So what they did was they removed the old code from there was an if condition with the flag. They removed the old code, wrote the new feature with it. So repurposed the old flag, and then they deployed it. And the problem with that was they had 8 servers, and because of a mess up, only 7 got the new code, and the eighth one still had the old code. So when they turned the feature on using that flag, 7 of the servers got the correct code, they were working perfectly, but the eighth one actually activated the old functionality, defunct functionality that's not supposed to be used anymore. And what happened, they almost became bankrupt because of it. Because it was an investment firm. It sent orders to the stock markets, millions of orders. It's bought like millions of shares of stock, and it's very high transaction per second system. So it cost them millions. Not only that, it also caused a huge disruption in the stock market as well, because of the artificially inflated uh, demand of some stocks. The price went through the roof, and so it caused a disruption there as well. And I believe that the company later had to uh, you know be acquired by another one, because they almost went bankrupt. So we are almost on time now, and that's the end of our session. Thank you so much. You feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I I do not have a Twitter or any other URL, so just feel free to uh, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. And let's go back to the sorry.